All right, guys. Good evening. This is from the Joint House Inquiry, and it's Carl Levin with an introductory comment. And let's see what he has to say.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, let me thank you, Ms. Hill, and your staff for
you,
getting us
sir.
to the point where we are finally analyzing and presenting to the American people the significant intelligence failures which occurred prior to September 11th. At this stage of the inquiry, much is already evident. First, the intelligence community said that it was at war with Osama bin Laden.
Just to add a little perspective on that, in 1999, the DCI for the Central Intelligence, George Tenet, declared war on Al Qaeda, and this is in response to the bombings of the U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. There was an outline written in 1999 about a directive to kill bin Laden and Al Qaeda. It was drafted by the director of Counterterrorism Center, Kofor Black, and it was called The Plan.
And had said so for 3 years prior to the attack of September 11th. Second, despite National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice's assertions to the contrary, the use of a plane as a terrorist weapon capable of causing mass casualties was neither ingenious nor novel, but rather a method of attack that the intelligence community knew that the terrorists were considering as early as the early and mid-90s.
The idea actually originated with the Bajinka plot in 1995, when Abdul Hakim Arad, an associate of Ramzi Youssef, who is the facilitator of the bomb of the World Trade Center in '93, Abdul Hakim Arad traveled to the Philippines to meet with Ramzi Youssef to become part of a multifaceted operation called Bajinka Plot, where in that plot, he would actually hijack a plane and crash it into CIA Langley headquarters. This idea of crashing a plane into a U.S. Building or a target originated in 1995. Now, funny thing is that Condoleezza Rice would say in the same year, a year later at the 9/11 Commission, that the Bush White House had no idea that they would use planes and weapons. As you could see here from our own staff statement or our own previous statement stating that the idea of planes was not new. They knew. They knew 6 years prior to 9/11 that planes were going to be used as weapons. The report for the Bajinka plot, which was compiled by Colonel Rodolfo Mendoza of the Philippine National Police with his interrogation of Abdul Hakim Arad, was given to the director of the FBI, Louis Freeh, and was given to the CEOs of the Federal Aviation Administration, in which, during their own testimonies, to both of them, stated that they got the information, but they didn't do anything with it. There was no stricter security measures for immigration. There was no stricter security measures given to the airline industry 6 years prior to 9/11.
Third, there is much troubling evidence that information crucial to preventing attacks by al-Qaeda terrorists was not shared or acted upon by intelligence officials.
Most notably the CIA. And I've said this ad nauseum, that when the CIA was monitoring an al-Qaeda summit in Malaysia in the year 2000, they knew that two of those participants, Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi, were going to enter the United States. Now, they knew this because they had taken photographs of their passports, found that they had dual U.S. visas, and that this was sent to officials at the Bin Laden Issue Station, codenamed Alex Station, and to the Counterterrorism Center. And the word was that nobody read the cable. According to George Tenet, director of CIA, told Carl Levin at the Joint Inquiry that nobody read that cable. In fact, over 50 agents from the Counterterrorism Center and the Bin Laden Issue Station read that cable. But the FBI could not share that information because the CIA said that the next operation would be outside their jurisdiction and that would be in Malaysia or Southeast Asia. And meanwhile, you had two Al Qaeda operatives going where? Inside the United States, the jurisdiction of the Department of Justice. And that's the reason why they didn't tell the FBI, because they feared the FBI would intervene. Now, the question is, why?
Prior to September 11th. Those intelligence failures will haunt loved ones and their families, and should also haunt us and motivate us to very strong and necessary reforms. Here's just a few examples that I'm summarizing from your report. In January of 2000, the U.S. intelligence community was alerted to a meeting of Al Qaeda members in Malaysia, including two of the eventual hijackers of American Airlines Flight 77. The handoff of that information from the CIA to the FBI was bungled. The individuals were not tracked, and inexplicably were not promptly placed on a watch list.
Now, here's the thing. The NSA, who were monitoring bin Laden's satellite phone, were monitoring this house in Yemen, which was an Al Qaeda communications hub. They heard about the meeting of Malaysia on one of the phone calls in December of '99. And so that's how they knew that Al Qaeda operatives Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi were going to go to this meeting, and that the both of them were going to inside the United States afterwards. So the NSA and the CIA knew about this and didn't tell the FBI. The question is why? Why are we touching this subject? Why doesn't anybody know about this? This is a huge conspiracy, magnificent. Nobody talks about it.
10 days later, the two accomplices entered the United States on a flight to Los Angeles. The location of the individuals after they were finally placed on the watch list was also mishandled.
That's right. So the CIA could have put both Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi on a watch list. Now, here's what bothers me, is that the CIA knew that both of these men were Al-Qaeda operatives. They knew that they were talking to a leader of the USS Cole bombing, Tawfiq bin Attash, known as Khalid, who was at this meeting, because Khalid is actually the one who called them at the house in Yemen. They can tie these two individuals to the bombing of the USS Cole and the bombing of the East Africa embassy bombings, as well as being Al-Qaeda fighters in the Balkans under Ibn Khattab fighting against the Soviets. So these two guys had the longest experience out of any of the 9/11 hijackers in regards to their experience with Al-Qaeda. They knew these two men were dangerous. Why didn't the CIA or the NSA inform the FBI or inform the State Department about them being here so they could be properly monitored? Why? Why were they not put on a watch list? These are the questions 9/11 Truth Movement should be asking themselves. But 20 years, they haven't addressed any of this.
Second, a July 10, 2001 memorandum from an FBI field agent in Phoenix to the Osama bin Laden unit and the radical fundamentalist unit at FBI headquarters, requesting that an investigation be opened into foreign terrorist training at flight schools in the U.S. was never acted upon, nor was the Phoenix field investigation shared with the CIA as specifically suggested by the FBI agent.
Now, I've interviewed the author of that memo, the Phoenix memo. His name is Ken Jennings. Ken Williams, who worked out of the Phoenix office. He wrote this memo on the basis of having an informant inside the Islamic radical community, and that informant gave him information about dangerous individuals with ties to Islamic extremist groups abroad and inside the United States that go back to the early 1990s, that they're training at flight schools. Now, Arizona, especially Scottsdale, is home to the most flight schools in the country. That's why they go there. It's also a hot climate. So the Saudis are, very accumulated to the climate. So basically, this information is enormous. We have terrorist groups led by an individual the FBI knew in Phoenix, Zachariah Subra, who had ties with bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. And this information was ignored. In fact, the president of the United States, George Bush, knew about this memo in 2002. John O'Neill, New York FBI agent, Dave Frasca, Radical Fundamentalist Unit in Minnesota, and others were not made aware of it until later because the cable was information only.
and this is not in your memo, but this is what we learned, that nearly a year after the Phoenix memo, the FBI director was unable to explain to our committee who saw that request from the Phoenix FBI agent, what was done with the request, and who, if anyone, had been held accountable for letting that important information fall between some crack.
Yeah, nobody. FBI. Well, a legal officer of the FBI, Colleen Raleigh, who I also interviewed, was magnificent in that talk. Talked about this issue and raising it with the director of the FBI, Robert Mueller. In fact, she wrote a scathing letter talking about the mishandling and malfeasance regarding the superiors of the FBI in numerous offices, not taking advantage of the information given to them by the ground FBI agents on the ground, those with pertinent information, largely ignored. Doesn't just end there. It goes with Robert Wright Jr. out of Chicago, Mark Rossini and Doug Miller at Alex Station, Ken Williams in Phoenix. So there's a number of FBI whistleblowers that nobody listened to, and some of them even came under fire from their own Inspector General.
Third, the August 16, 2001 arrest of Zacharias Moussaoui and the suspicions of the FBI agents in Minneapolis that he might be planning to undertake a terrorist attack using a plane, and the urgent request that a warrant to search his computer and other belongings were not acted upon by FBI headquarters. And I want to emphasize a point here. These were not some reports from unreliable sources. These were not unconfirmed statements. These were FBI agents that were asking for action. Their requests were ignored.
With the Minnesota field office, there was a huge argument between the radical fundamentalist unit led by Robert Bowman and Dave Frasca, along with FBI agents like Harry Samet Jr., who was involved with the arrest of Zacharias Moussaoui. Moussaoui basically was with another individual named Hussein Al-Attas at a hotel room, and that because they're foreign nationals, a regular warrant would not suffice. So they had to get a FISA warrant, a foreign warrant, to look at their belongings. But in order to do that, they had to tie these two men with militant extremism or any type of group that basically threatens national security. Well, on his person was a martyrdom will, and Hussein Al-Attas basically said to the FBI agents that Zacharias Moussaoui basically gave derogatory and declaratory threatening remarks to attack the United States. Now, later on, when they were investigating Moussaoui, there was intelligence coming in from Germany, from France, showing a direct tie between Zacharias Moussaoui and a militant Islamic cleric named Abu Hamza, who has a hook for a hand. Now, this basically came from intelligence sources. So right then and there, that was enough to approve for a FISA warrant, a foreign intelligence warrant. No, says Dave Frasca. No. In fact, the wording of the warrant itself was not applicable. It was left up to too much interpretation. So that all this bureaucracy nonsense somehow basically wasn't enough to persuade anybody at the radical fundamentalist unit to approve for the warrant. And when 9/11 happened, it's too late. But somehow the next day, yeah, they could look at Moussaoui's laptops and belongings that were found in the hotel room. A little bit too late.
Now, I believe it is critically important for the administration to release the Phoenix Memorandum, documents relating to the Minneapolis FBI office request, and other documents that will allow the American people to judge for themselves the significance of these missed signals and the failures to share information between and within the intelligence and law enforcement communities. The committee, I understand, has asked for declassification of those documents. That request is under consideration, I understand, by the administration in preparation for next week's hearings. And we've had discussion about this already this morning, but I do hope that the leadership of these committees, our committees, will let the administration know that our committees will seek congressional authorization by legislation if necessary to declassify appropriate information if the executive branch refuses. We have chairman and vice chairman of our committees who've agreed on some matters. It seems to me that is enough for us as committees to automatically authorize them to seek legislation should the executive branch refuse. And that would go to future refusals, not just the previous ones. The American people understand that perfection is unattainable, but they also believe, as I do, that when errors are made, accountability is essential if lessons are to be learned for the sake of the future security of our nation. Now, is my time up?
Yeah, that's it. So, look, I keep it short and simple. The intelligence community, especially the CIA, specifically the CIA and the NSA, had enough information at their disposal that goes back to 1992, at least 96. Okay, information that is shared with the FBI, with the State Department, and local and state law enforcement, local city, state law enforcement. 9/11 could have been prevented. And not only that, even abroad, information that could have been shared with U.S. officials regarding 98 East Africa bombings, that could have been stopped. Okay, so you have two instances. Three, even the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, that could have been stopped. The intelligence community, foreign and domestic, were involved with the monitoring of these incidents. It's no coincidence that they do. The job of the intelligence service, like the FBI, like the CIA, the NSA, the DIA, is to collect information through either physical information, human intelligence, or electronic information, emails, phone calls, signals intelligence. And when you have an enormous agency like the CIA and the NSA, basically collecting information through means that are impossible for a regular individual, and no one's held accountable when this information is not shared, well, then it leaves open the door for any conspiracy, even the most ridiculous ones. And this is what happened to the 9/11 Truth Movement. But the 9/11 Truth Movement never looked at these anomalies that Carl Levin talked about. Why? Because right off the bat, and I wonder if this is intentional, that people within the 9/11 Truth Movement, the fringe parts, basically said, don't read the 9/11 Commission report, don't bother, everything's a lie. If everything's a lie, you don't need to read it. Well, if you're being told this, how would you know if it's a lie unless you read it? Now, I will tell you that not everything in the 9/11 Commission report is a lie, but not everything is truthful. And like I've said before, it's an incomplete report. There was so much information, even information I related in this video, that wasn't in the report or in the joint inquiry report for that matter. So unless we get over this hump of laziness and being held to these divisive worldviews and these ridiculous beliefs, then you're going to be stuck right where you are 20 years from now, complaining that nobody gets anything done when you could have. Because there are conspiracies that weren't investigated with 9/11. There's so many pre-intelligence conspiracies and anomalies, but they were never brought to the light because we have a corrupt media that don't report honestly, and we had a truth movement that was compromised by whack jobs, whether intentionally or unintentionally. So, I mean, we're 21 years past the crimes of 9/11 and nothing involving the judicial atmosphere and no civil suits, nothing, except for the civil suit brought by the victims' families, led by law firms Creedler and Creedler and Botley Rice, and that's it. So it's high time that we take advantage of the information that we have, and it's been there for 21 years, and we could still fight for more. Have a good night, everybody.